Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Simone de Beauvoir, in the third part of her work, The Ethics of Ambiguity, has a section titled The Antinomies of Action, and it's going to end by coming back to a theme which she has discussed a bit earlier, which is people's appeals to usefulness as if it's some sort of absolute, which many people were doing in her own time, were doing before, and many people do in our contemporary world today. And she's going to begin this section by talking about violence in particular. So she says, the partisan who is sure of their aims will say, very well, but this violence is useful. And the justification which he here invokes is that which in the most general way inspires and legitimizes all action. And then we get this great quote from conservatives to revolutionaries through idealistic and moral vocabularies or realistic and positive ones. The outrageousness of violence is excused in the name of utility. And the violence could take many different forms. Just earlier, she was talking about totalitarian states and atrocities committed against people, essentially reducing them to the level of things which then can be wiped out. But we can think of many other forms as well where people are effectively cut off from the possibilities of fully human transcendence. And, it's being justified on the basis of its usefulness, maybe even necessity or desirability. And she's going to point out, listen, useful does not have an absolute meaning. You've always got to index it to something. And anytime somebody's acting as if it does have an absolute, perfectly clear meaning and solves all of the discussion and difficulties, there's some kind of sleight of hand going on here. And she says that, some people will justify it, the violence that's taking place, by saying, well, we're going to win. It'll be ratified once victory comes about. Defeat would change the murders and destruction into unjustified outrage. They would have been carried out in vain. But victory gives meaning and utility to all the misfortunes which have helped bring it about. And how often have we seen these sort of justifications? A great example of this in the present are the people here in America who are unable to come to terms with the fact that we have a terrible history, which was known at the time, diagnosed by all sorts of people, of imposing horrible domination, exploitation, suffering, humiliation on people in the regime that we called antebellum slavery, right? And some people need to say, well, it was needed for economic development, so all of that is somehow justified. It was useful. Or the slaves were better off like that. People will go through all sorts of mental gyrations to just not face up to the fact that some horrible things were done, and then horrible things on top of them, and we could go on and on. So she says, a position like this would be solid and satisfactory if the word useful had an absolute meaning in itself. As we've seen, the characteristic of what she calls the spirit of seriousness is to confer a meaning upon it, on useful, by raising the thing or the cause to the dignity of what she calls an unconditioned end. Now, that's a technical term in philosophy. An unconditioned end, something that is valuable in and of itself. And therefore, whatever leads to that, or protects it, or preserves it, or furthers it, is going to be good because it's useful as a means to that. And she says once you've done that, then the only problem raised is a technical problem. It's not an ethical problem because you've already decided what's going to be good. You just need to choose means by various characteristics. And she gives you several different examples of this. She says the means can be chosen according to their effectiveness, their speed, and their economy. You just have to measure the relationships of time, cost, and probability of success, right? Or you can think of wartime and discipline, which spares subordinates problems of calculation. They concern only the staff. The soldier doesn't call into question the aim or the means of attaining it. They just have to obey, right? And she says, human efforts and lives can no more be treated as blind instruments than human work can be treated as simple merchandise because we're dealing with human beings, right? At the same time, a human being is a means for attaining an end. They are also an end. This is, very important not to leave out. And she's going to say that the word useful requires a complement, and there can only be one in reality, human being or man itself, right? And she says the only reason why the soldiers don't realize this in mutiny is because skillful propaganda is persuading them that they are dedicating themselves to the cause of human beings. Those enemies over there are barbarians. They are terrible. You are the good guys. They're the bad guys. And what happens when that starts to go away, when the propaganda isn't being put out there or no longer is useful? Well, then you do actually have breakdown and mutiny and a loss of morale because, it makes sense to do so. So she's going to go on and say, that's great. There's some problems here for us. This is why these are antinomies of action. Is the cause of man that of each man, she asks. And she says, philosophers are taking a stab at this. She invokes two different philosophical approaches or traditions. She talks about the utilitarians striving to demonstrate this since Hegel. Actually, before that, Jeremy Bentham is on the scene before Hegel comes on the scene. So we could say that the utilitarian tradition actually starts some of this, but it is also very prevalent in Hegelian approaches to things that say that the totality is what matters and individuals matter insofar as they're part of the totality. The cause of man takes priority over the cause of any one single person. And she says, if you want to give the word a useful, a universal, an absolute meaning, what do these people do? They reabsorb each person into the bosom of humanity, right? So she says it is true that each is bound to all, but that's the ambiguity of our condition. In our surpassing towards others, each exists absolutely for themselves. Each should be interested in the liberation of all, but as a separate existence engaged in his own projects. So when we're actually looking at it closely, we see that the terms useful to humanity, per se, and useful to this person don't actually overlap. She says universal, absolute man exists nowhere. It's an abstraction. So she says, from this angle, we come on the same antinomy. The only justification of sacrifice of at least some people, is its utility, but the useful is what serves man. So in order to serve some people, we have to do disservice to others, and then this imposes on us a responsibility, a choice, and a need for some sort of criterion or principle. So then she's going to, in the rest of this section, examine some of the principles for this choice between negation of one freedom or another in favor of somebody else's freedom. So how can we decide this? And she says, if we think about it in one way, the freedom of a single person must count more than a cotton or a rubber harvest. Although this principle is not respected in fact, it's usually recognized theoretically. But it's not quite so easy as that, because that harvest is going to be important for other people, right? It may be what stands between them and complete impoverishment or indeed dying, right? So we can say, yeah, every single person matters, but how are we going to make them matter? So one way is to take, as she says, numerical considerations into account. And she says, there's a strange compromise here which shows that every action treats human beings both as a means and an end, as an external object and an inwardness. It's better, she says, to save the lives of 10 men than only one. And what are we doing there? We're treating human beings as an end, right? We're treating the 10 who we save as ends, and we're treating the one as a mean. And this is indeed what utilitarian calculations would advise doing, right? Opposed to that is typically the Kantian insistence that we must never use humanity in ourselves or in another merely as a means and not as, at the same time, an end. So I suppose from a Kantian perspective, if you can ask the one person, hey, do you consent to being sacrificed for the 10? And they're like, yeah, let me look at the whole situation. All right, I consent to that. That could be okay. From a Kantian perspective, they would be treated as an end. That's not how it typically works, though, is it? We make determinations, for the economy, for triage, for who to send into battle, based on, just numerical considerations. And she says the Kantian seems to be in a better position, right? It's as immoral to choose the death of a single man as to let 10,000 die. And she says, well, he was right in the sense that in each murder, the outrage is total. 10,000 dead, there's never 10,000 copies of a single death. No multiplication is relevant to subjectivity. But that's not the end of the story. She says, he forgot that for the one who had the decision to make, men are given as an object that can be counted. We actually can say, save 5, let 1 die, right? It's logical, even though the logic implies an outrageous absurdity to prefer the salvation of the greatest number. And then she says there's also another complicating factor. What is this? Well, we rarely base a choice on pure quantity. We can be partial in certain ways. She's going to give some examples. The men among whom one hesitates have functions in society. The general who's sparing of the lives of his soldier saves them as human material, useful to save for tomorrow's battles or for the reconstruction of the country. And sometimes they condemn to death thousands of civilians whose fate he's not concerned with in order to spare the lives of 100 soldiers or even 10 specialists, right? She brings up another wrinkle. In the death camps, the SS obliged the responsible members to designate which prisoners were to go to the gas chambers. Politicians agreed to assume the responsibility because they thought they had a valid principle of selection. They protected the politicians of their party because the lives of these people were devoted to a cause which they thought was just, seemed to them the more useful to preserve. An example of, making exceptions, of partiality, right? And so she actually says the communists often get accused of this as well. So what does this come back to? She says, it seems like we haven't made much progress. We come back in the end to the statement that what appears as useful is to sacrifice the less useful to the more useful. And that, again, if we had an absolute meaning to useful, well, that might see us through, but we don't. We're always choosing what it is that we think counts as being useful because we have to choose the end. And if the end is going to be human beings, and she's actually going to say it's going to be a bit more complicated than that as she's approaching the end, she says that the useful has to be understood not just as a complement in terms of human being or man, but also the future. The human being, insofar as the human being is the future of human beings, perhaps not even the same human being. So we don't reach a nice, neat conclusion, but what we do see along the way is the problematic of appealing to usefulness or to other stand-in words like efficiency or cost effectiveness or any of these other things that some people actually do take as absolutes. So, very interesting discussion that brings the third section of the third section, Antinomies of Action, to a conclusion and then leads into a discussion of the relationship between the present and the future of humankind.